Fernando, we already started with the panel. We are here together, and we love to actually integrate you in the panel. Maybe I will now repeat the question we started the panel with, and maybe you can also contribute to this question, just from the heart, so to say, and then we can follow up with your actual presentation, and you can maybe tell us where you are at the moment and what you're doing, and right now. Would this be an option for you? Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead with the question.
Okay. Maybe very briefly, Fernando, to the audience, I would like to introduce you. Your name is Fernando Garcia Dori. You are part of the collective Inland, which is active in many places in Spain. And I think you have been, you came together in 2009? And since then, please tell us how you see yourself. Please describe Inland to us.
Was this the question, or is this a question of the question?
This was not a question, but a little request.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for your patience, and I'm very glad to have the chance to participate even in the distance. Well, I see myself as part of a broader organism in some sense, that is the collective Inland plus the animals we have and the village and forest we inhabit and the land we are taking care of plus the networks we are part of, and very often taking the role of ambassador visionary for this collective. And at the moment I'm here in Glasgow for COP26, and I will tell you about it in a moment, but maybe go ahead with your other question.
Okay.
As a way to not to break too much the very nice dynamic and debate you were having. I'm very sad to kind of intrude on that somehow, but I'm sorry if it's a bit noisy.
Don't worry. We're happy to have you with us. The question was, as we were speaking the entire day about sustainability from very different points of view, from very different activities, coming from very different activities. We have seen works by Saudat Ismailova, by Pina Ugrenci, by Nguyen Trinti, and all of them dealt on a different way with sustainability, ecological sustainability, and the effects of climate change, of the effects of human interaction in nature to the communities, for example, the fading away of the Aral Sea, what this means for the fishermen that are living around the Aral Sea, just as an example. So this was what we were speaking about the entire day, and the question in the panel was a bit to all the different participants, also the scientists from University Hessen-Forst, but we also have artists participating. The question is, where do you see the potential of art to be able to change ways of thinking, and to actually change, in our context today, make a change of, towards a more sustainable future, so to say, to kind of not use climate change word too often, so to say. And so where do you see the potential of art for change?
For how long will we continue this conversation? But well, I'll try to be brief. It's a big question. I think that we're talking maybe about the need to bring together different languages and to have a new sort of environmental literacy. So there is this notion, we were talking yesterday about it in Cove Park, an artist space here in northern Scotland, the idea of glossolalia, or different languages that can talk to each other. And there's the science, there's the the other form of maybe re-enchanting, with a world we have lost connection with, that could be brought in by the poetry. But there is also the need to connect with forms of knowledge that are beyond, no? Maybe the parameters of both science and sometimes aesthetical discourses as we know they manifest in contemporary art. I think that what you were discussing before is connecting with a broader notion of culture, and is very connected as well with not just the way of talking about something that would involve like yes, the wording and a form of literacy, but also how it comes with the making, with the act. So I think that the role of art is maybe to just be embedded in everyday maneuvers, but to be able to make them not only operational or functional, but also moving, and able to make us to transcend that everyday action that for me is very much connected with replace positioning ourselves as part of an ecological cycle in relation with land management and cultivation and care in a very broad sense. It could be at many levels. It might not necessarily mean being direct custodianship of a piece of land and being co-responsible with it for nourishing, no? And nurturing oneself, the other beings, and the future. So in that sense, yeah, I think we shouldn't just think on the role of art as representing or taking sustainability or environmental questions as an issue, as a genre, as a new theme, like to tick the box in these days. And maybe it could be as well education or community or another topic, but more to think very much on how that can come together with the act, the doing, the poiesis, that is in Greek, the creation as well, but in a very much manufacturing, the sense of manufacturing as well, or making, and those acts are, yeah, the practice is very much related with the representation. I don't know if it makes sense what I said, but just to give you an example, I was talking yesterday as well about the experience of being with the Sami people in the Arctic areas or in the Scandinavia, where they had the chance to develop quite a self-governing, powerful space, quite empowered these days compared to the other side, for example, in the border, the Sami in Russian areas. And the Norwegian Sami were saying, well, now, yes, it's great. We have a university, we have a parliament, we have PhDs, PhD students, Sami students, looking and reproducing in different disciplines, in art, in science, no? Sami concepts. But all of this knowledge and all this literacy is losing currency as far as we are losing, for example, reindeer herding and the practices and the knowledge of going through the forests with the flocks that gave body and sense to that. No? So I think the role of art now is to bring us back to the fulfilling aspect of yeah, poetry while making, no? Let's say.
Thanks for bringing this up. We were speaking about exactly this with Sikukeluang, with ruangrupa, and we also had today exactly this topic in the film provided by Masate Masaksion. No, this is, so we are not only speaking about inland and your activities, but you also brought up the Sami people, which is exactly the same topic. Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. And what I wanted to maybe briefly add to your answer to my question is there is in all the in your like in the work that's in like the artistic work of inland, same goes for the artistic work of Sikukeluang. There is not like something in between. You don't put the work that you are going to show on a wooden plate. No, it's not painting. It's not necessarily film. It's not necessarily. It's like really direct action, And this also kind of is helpful in being more direct and being active with the actual people. Could be, no? But maybe we can now jump to, let's say, the presentation that you organized for us today, so that we can kind of integrate this in this round as well. That would be super.
Yes, I'll try to be brief, because I would like just to try to contribute to the overall question that it's been considered for today, that is connected also with ecosystem restoration and reforesting in a very high degree, if I'm not wrong. And just to add to the previous question, that I think also that when we talk about bringing an ecological concern into art, we have to look at the ecologies of art and the ecologies of art making, and how we, for example, in the art system, can transition from a mode of hyperproduction, hypermobility, self-exploitation and exploitation of the other, individual careerism and competition, into other forms of symbiosis and more, sustainable mutual care. So that should be about how we do things and not just what we do. So it could be a very ecocidal art world that has all of the artworks talking about ecology, if I explain myself. But I wanted to just reflect a little bit on the question of ecosystem restoration and tree planting schemes. I'm now here in Glasgow at COP26. We had the effort to come here with a delegation of nomadic pastoralists from different parts of the world, from Mongolia, from Uganda, Tuareg from Mali, and Bedouin from Jordan, as well as Sami people and other places. And this effort that is enormous, because, for example, visas, travels, the cost is high, but we nevertheless felt it was important not only to try to have an impact on this huge, let's say, chaos. No? The blue zone is like a sort of, as someone was saying, as an airport terminal in which everyone is trying to sell something, and you end up having like Formula One cars in big pedestals because they are electric, and a lot of technological-based solutions. And I think it's a kind of sociological expressions of the times we are being. No? These major conferences gathering 30,000 people from around the world to discuss about this specific question of how thermo-capitalist civilization manifests today in the biosphere, that is the climate crisis. But we felt it was important to try to make the nomadic peoples and pastoralist voice heard, and at the same time to try to have a moment for internal, let's say, construction of the movement. So we are organized with regional representatives and from the different regions, and we will have moments also to organize ourselves and to reconnect with other constituencies like the farmers or the fisher folk. Now, COP26 and what we had before, now that we just were finishing, as well, the conference on biodiversity in China, is bringing tree planting in as a huge target. In 2011, United Nations One Challenge proposed that 350 million of hectares of land could be restored through tree planting by 2030. National governments and regional blocs too have massive plans for more trees. There is this notorious project called the Sahelian Great Green Wall, and the Africa 100 initiative, it's funded by multiple international donors, including the World Bank, has committed to reforest 100 million hectares in Africa in the coming decade. But the question is this always a good idea? And not necessarily, because many of the areas earmarked for tree planting are rangelands. Estimates vary, but many millions of hectares of rangelands have been identified by, for example, ETH Zurich for forest restoration. So this is assuming that rangelands are degraded forests in need for rehabilitation, rather than highly productive biodiverse ecosystems that support many livestock and people. And there is a lot of studies that are showing that those restoration assessments may massively overestimate the climate mitigation of tree planting schemes. For example, in terms of carbon capture, in terms of sun radiation refraction, grasslands and rangelands are much more effective than tree planting. There was a very interesting paper I'll share with you. It's called The Travel with Trees, and scientists start to identify that tree planting overlap with grassy biomes, including rangelands, wildlife species richness and livestock production. So the question is that the restoration through tree planting in such areas would have major negative consequences for wildlife, biodiversity, and pastoral livelihoods. The idea behind the problem is that some of the assessment of this idea of grasslands and rangelands as being degenerated forests is simply bad science. They are more open ecosystems, variegated mixes of trees and grasslands, mosaics that exist together in savannas and parklands, and they are maintained by grazing, fire, and human actions. So they are some of the most biodiverse areas in the planet. I'm going to show you some images of the work we are doing in inland. I'm sorry if it's a bit noisy, just let me know. But I'm trying to, if I can share a screen. Someone has to enable me to share the screen, I think. But meanwhile, well, today we had here in a piece of land in front of the COP26 a sheep action. We brought some sheep, and it has been very beautiful to have the Scottish sheep herders together with the pastoralists from Mongolia and other places, and trying to enrich and bring a more nuanced debate on the issue of the role of livestock and the role of forests in climate change. Just for a moment. Okay. So, oh, sorry. In this moment, we are more thinking on a forest. Let's think what a forest could be, and let's consider how it could be a space for new commons, no? And also the politics of rewilding. We very, very much would like just to find an easy fix to climate crisis, but sometimes it's more complex than just planting trees, and also it depends on why, when, where, and how trees are planted. Sometimes it makes sense, and it's really an important gesture, and there are spaces to regenerate. These are some of the actions we were doing these days, by the way, for the climate, and looking to promote the International Year for Rangelands. Tomorrow we have this also event at IFAD Pavilion in the Blue Zone. But I tell you a little bit more about the work we are doing in one of the inland locations, the village north of Spain. And then we are developing new curriculum as a form of understanding how the different disciplines from different universities could merge and compose new knowledges together with the peasant knowledge and take the village as a sort of applied knowledge lab. So this is the place that we are working with, and you can see that there are 6 hectares of forest behind the village. Big part of it is covered by eucalyptus. The village, it's in itself a 16th century place with previous common land, and then the land is in the top of the mountains is being used by pastoralists. So what you see here is a process of new bushers coming in and colonizing the land, and then also involving a high risk of fires. This is showing you the lack of goats and lack of sheep being able to make profit from this excess of grass, surplus that otherwise wouldn't be transformed into proteins able to be used by human communities. So livestock is not always competing with farming. That's the first question we need to think. And here we see a group of artists, landscape engineers, forest engineers, and architects talking to Nell, the shepherd, our colleague in inland. And we are taking these opportunities in the village to look to also how this knowledge could make sense. Sorry, I'm trying to move to the next picture. Sorry. And then the groups are looking at these study cases, like the mountain, the village, and the forest, as spaces to rethink The case of the forest is very interesting for us. I mentioned that it evolves from a native forest, as opportunities for learning. Every time we are doing, one of these gatherings, we start to make also proposals, and they become as well production, publications and publishing opportunities to gather the knowledge of this embedded experience on the land. And these experiences also take very much from the vernacular forms of cultural expression, like the way in which characters are in these areas represented for certain moments of the year. For example, in this case, in other situations, like in the forest, by the end of the winter, there is a character that represents as well, like somehow the rebirth. And those are cultural expressions that come from the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the forest becomes the space of freedom, and it recovers new meanings that were not considered in the Roman times. No? In the Roman civilization, the rus, no, the cultivated land, was the land in which the promised civilization was lying, and the forest was wilderness and avial. Now, as we know, this is like a kind of a dichotomy, no, between the Germanic notions of the world and the Romanic notions of the world. There is a romantic notion that still sees the forest as a space in which we can, purify the sins we committed as a hyper-civilization, no? as a domesticator of the land. But much before the Middle Ages, in the Paleozoic era, there are new trees coming up. These fossils show that Eucalyptus globulus was extended through most parts of the world in that era. So there is fossil evidence that there were eucalyptus trees masses all around the world. But as Australia was separating from the main big continent, from Gondwana, the eucalyptus started to be less of a tropical tree and more adapted to arid conditions. And eucalyptus now has grown into a diversity of species, and these species are very adapted to the desert conditions, and also what we call pedophilic species. That means that the eucalyptus is somehow growing with fire. Fires and fire management was crucial to the forest management by Aboriginal Australians. And this has been misunderstood very often by the Western scientists and botanists. Forests now burn in California and Australia and other parts. A few degrees rise will bring new fires, and we still don't allow native populations and indigenous communities to make use of the forms of opening clears in the fires and cleaning that are like part of those ecosystems. So the pedophilic capacities of eucalyptus applied to other regions of the world might be catastrophic. We will show you why. In the north of Spain as well, but in other parts. In Italy, for example, in the 20s, there was that impulse promoted by Il Duce, Benito Mussolini, to bring new wealth to vast areas of Italy that were just marshlands and what is called palude, that is related with the idea of paludism. So the promised new land or the interior colony that Mussolini was conquering and, let's say, geoengineering was transformed into new cities, a new arable land, mostly also through the use of eucalyptus. No? This famous image of Mussolini, just a little bit a la Putin, we could say, without shirt, is showing this idea that man can harness the wilderness and kind of replace it in its own image, like put forest here or put eucalyptus there. Well, this had a terrible impact in northern Spain. Spain is a country that is a kind of a ecosystem of transition between the Atlantic and the Central European ecosystems into the African ones. And the north coast of Spain has been massively reforested with eucalyptus trees. Spain was very deforested, especially the central part. part of the colonial empire impulse, no? The mission to bring wars, Christianity, and civilization to other continents. But now the native forests of northern Spain are very much replaced by eucalyptus forest, by this monoculture. This was like promoted in Franco time during the dictatorship enormously, and new landscapes appeared, landscapes that were replacing the other diversity. These new forests are not really forests, are what we could call the green deserts of the monocultures. And eucalyptus is a tree that reproduces enormously, has an amazing grass root system, and can compete with any other tree under conditions of fire. So we are facing now in our region the need to rethink that forestry model, and the need to rethink what are the ways to have richer ecosystems that are just beyond forest monocultures. In the 70s, the huge development of ophimatics, Olivetti fax machine and others gave birth to a new need to have a paper pulp from eucalyptus. Navigator is the printing paper that is commercialized by Iberian company, the biggest in the world. And these main two paper companies in the world are from Portugal and north of Spain, with huge factories that produce paper pulp at the same time that we have also new fires in this forest. So here are some images of reforesting schemes in Gobi Desert. As you know, there is this idea of what it could be the Great Green Wall that would be like taking over, particularly the area of Inner Mongolia, no? That is also conquered by China as a sort of inner colony, displacing nomadic peoples and forcibly settling them. But we are now trying to rethink how we could deal with the eucalyptus forest in the north of Spain, and developing this idea of new commons, taking from the Middle Ages commons management of trees, forests, and involving the neighbors in replanting schemes of chestnut, of oak tree, of different varieties of trees that are slow-growing trees, but at the same time allow a much higher biodiversity in terms of the soil macrobiota, fungal rhizomas, as well as tree birds and other fauna. It's also very important to consider that it's not just about tree planting, it's about forest caring and cultivation, and that means to think on agro-silvopastoral systems. It's not just forestry, it's just how we can bring animals inside the forest that keep it clean, that keep it free of bushes that are a major fuel and risk in case of wildfires. So for many decades we have faced the let's say fear of forest engineers towards goat flocks, for example, thinking that the goats and the sheep in the forest would just kill the forest. And in fact, many indigenous practices in Rajasthan, in India, or in the Scandinavia, they involve shepherding inside the forests. So this is crucial. I will just leave it here while we are doing a new set of forest characters in inland, but just try to share with you a little bit of these concerns that I think should bring a more nuanced debate on what is the future of eco schemes for ecosystem restoration. We are at the moment, as I was saying, very much involved in trying to have this movement of pastoralists organized. And I think it would be beautiful that ecosystem restorations are not just happening in a top-down approach, but actually more the idea of community managed ecosystems that are richer than just forests. And well, if I can just share again very quickly, this is what we are trying to put together pastoralists in very diverse areas, like the Tuareg people, in the sub-Sahel. And just to show you what are we talking about when we're talking about global grasslands. It's more than 50% of Earth's surface are grasslands and rangelands. And in some areas, in some cases, 70% is privately owned. Like in the US, only 10% of them belong to native nations. So these are some of the moments of gatherings of the nomadic peoples working through regions, so Eastern Africa, with the Maasai and other Borana and other peoples, Europe, and then defining together and being able to have an influence at a global arena. No? Hindu Ibrahim, for example, was talking yesterday as well at the main plenary of the COP26. We were bringing the pastoralists as well to documenta some editions before, and still working now with the COVID situation through new technologies and so on. So I would leave it here, and I hope it was an interesting contribution to the debate. I'm looking forward to hear more about your ideas for how the tax that could be a very revolutionary, interesting element, you know, for the whole documenta economy could serve effectively not only for a wider and richer and more holistic notion of ecosystem restoration, but also for arts and the development of transformative environmental collaborative art, together maybe with the projects and collectives that we are working with in Lumbung, that I think there are maybe interesting case studies to depart from. And at this moment we are working together with two collectives from Lumbung into what we call the land projects in different parts, like in Indonesia or in Kenya or northern Spain. So thank you so much.
Thanks to you.
Sorry for being a bit long.
That was in fact super interesting. It was also very complex. Actually, I thought that I would like to kind of pass the mic directly to the ones who are working with trees and forests to maybe comment on what Fernando said with regard to the eucalyptus tree and how it is now cultured, recultured, or I don't know how to say in Spain. Would you like to? You are totally free to say no. No. Herr Gerst von Hessen was auch no. Yeah.
But maybe one thought. So, I mean, eucalyptus is a non-native species, and there was a statement that I got from the presentation by Hessenforst that they're not betting too much money on non-native species. They want to work with the native ones. Our approach in Indonesia is also that we want to use in our agroforestry system that we're trying with the oil palm, that we use native tree species there that are of value for the people. And I think that seems to be like a common idea from today, so that we all probably can agree on that we rather go for native species than for exotic ones. Because people have more experience with them. We avoid risks, like you said, fires here in Europe. These are other problems that we would get with exotic species.
Yeah, I think the species one chooses are crucial, and also the forms of reforesting, the places, the process that brings that forest alive. And I'm sure that you are considering very much elements of participation and engagement in those, defining all these different parameters in case new forests have to come.
And sorry, maybe one other thought is that we really need to consider the context. It might make a huge difference if we talk about Spain and goats in that traditional system. And I'm quite sure that in Hessen, goats would not be the way to go to restore forests here. So you really need to have to think about the context. and often they're not easy solutions, like you mentioned in your beginning. These big glossy studies that came out, how many trillion trees one can plant, and so there's always a risk for the simple solution that you then end up causing even bigger problems than if you plant trees in areas where they don't belong to, or things like that, right?
Vielleicht noch ein Gedanke. Es wurde ja die große grüne Mauer in der inneren Mongolei angesprochen. Hier haben hessische Forstleute tatsächlich auch haben bei diesem
rangers and foresters from Hesse worked along with the Green Great Wall and implemented methods with which native plants could be replicated and cultivated. That was very conducive. And when it comes to reforestation, which is necessary, it's definitely necessary to go for reforestation, and much of what we have learned in the meantime needs to be applied in the wake of this effort. Local solutions should be used with native species, native crops from the region, and plants from the region. And our experience is that the closer we work to nature, the more successful an approach can be.
May I just ask you something, because I'm not absolutely sure if I understood that right, but you mentioned this wonderful new strategy to plant these millions of hectares of forest in areas which are already quite biodiverse. And as I said, I'm not too deep into this discussion, but I was asking myself, I mean, it's probably something that they celebrate quite a lot, this new idea and this as a kind of solution to all the problems we have. Is there already, I mean, how is the discussion on, instead of planting trees on already quite biodiverse areas, I mean, the option to reduce the expansion of cities, to reduce the expansion, or for example, to reuse instead of expanding the villages, to reuse spaces that have formerly been used by the industry. I think there are still quite a lot of areas that could be used for planting forests, and also the idea to reduce the expansion of villages. I know that there is a discussion, but could you just give me an overview, or give us an overview? Do you see there an interesting potential as well, or do you think this idea to expand the forest on already biodiverse areas, I mean, that there is no alternative to that? I mean, is the usage, is the reduction of the growth of cities and reusing industrial areas, would that be a good alternative from your point of view?
Well, yes, I'm not an expert on industrial landscapes restoration. I guess there we are facing also a different set of problems, because we are coming from a very anthropogenic landscape that might have even transformation at soil chemical levels, and then some forms of transitioning vegetation designs have to be put in place. And I think it would be about to understand, yes, what is the bioma that really works in that area. But of course, industrial and urban areas are coming maybe from a let's say ground zero in terms of biodiversity. So anything would make it better. It could be also grasslands. Why not? We are working in Madrid city, rewilding, let's say, or renaturalizing, as we say it, areas that were supposed to be built, and that after the building crisis of 2009 were just left as sort of contemporary ruins, with semi-finished buildings or streets that were never going to be circulated. And we are working with the city planners and the city council to have not just, for example, olive trees in a form of open forest, but also the flock of sheep we have grazing around, because what we are coming from is from highly deteriorated soils, soils that have been very, very punished, let's say, by construction or by industry and so on. So what the best you can do there is like no tillage, no plowing at all, and as much as possible of a soil restoration through organic matter, distributed in a way that has no much impact, and avoiding also soil compactation. So big herbivores, as cows, have the risk even to damage in those conditions. So you are going like into a sort of, let's say, acupuncture, acupunctural intervention to recover some of the soil life in those situations. And sheep have a great role on that too. Otherwise, you can just add different types of compost and recovering as well. With bokashi and other techniques, you can recover a little bit of the mycorrhiza and fungal bioma that is needed for soil fertility and so on.